listening to episode 191 of Mitolife Radio. I am your host, Matt Blackburn, and today I'm interviewing Matt Jarosy. Matt is an integrative health coach based out of the United Kingdom, and he also has a supplement company called Elvide. Hopefully I pronounced that right. We both share a passion for shilajit and magnesium and feel like those two can help most people with a lot of different things that they're dealing with. He also sells some other interesting products, including a whole food iodine source, which I think is pretty cool. So this is a experimental interview to see how people like it. Just a coffee chat where we don't have any set topic in mind. So for people that might be new to a lot of this information, I think it could be helpful to just get a broad view of everything. We talk about hair tissue mineral analysis tests, talk about blood work and where Matt sees its value. And he shares something called internal family systems, a form of therapy that he's a big fan of. Talks about EFT and why he doesn't think that's the best therapy. We talk about dream therapy, serotonin, melatonin, vitamin K2, genetics, iodine, vitamin C, and a lot more. So enjoy the show. Here is Matt Jarosy. Okay, we're here with Matt Jarosy. Welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here, Matt.
Yeah, this will be a fun one because we have somewhat of a similar background. I think you've been studying a bit longer than me and have seen a lot of different perspectives, but it seems like we've both kind of gone down the fat route, looking at saturated fat and PUFAs and iron and EMFs and
all the good stuff.
Right. So we'll kick it off here. Like, what initially got you interested in health? Was it an ailment you were dealing with, or just curiosity? Or
I think like originally I was always interested in just like trying to be the healthiest I could when I was younger. Like originally I actually really wanted to just improve my skin. I think that's like a big one for people when they're younger. And then when I started university, I became really interested in like exercise science, like sports nutrition. I studied a lot of things like public health nutrition. And then after that, I moved more into like health coaching and things like that. And I did a course with a really great cancer doctor for a while. Yeah, and then after that, I started like exploring the field of like naturopathic medicine. I really like the school of naturopathy as well. And yeah, so just ever since then, I've just been doing all sorts of little courses and just trying to find more pieces of the puzzle. Oh, and obviously, I did like Morley's course as well.
Yeah. So have you been working like mostly one-on-one with clients?
Yeah, so all of my work is pretty much one-on-one. I do all of it over Zoom, really. It's just easier that way. It's just easier to like share blood work and things with clients. So yeah, and it's been really busy actually at the moment.
That's great. Yeah, I dabbled in one-on-one consultations over the years, and it's a lot of work, and usually one consult isn't enough, right? You need like follow-ups, and you need to do labs and kind of go back and forth, and it's pretty energy intensive.
Yeah, I mean, I try to keep my practice relatively small because I really like to have a close relationship with my clients over time. I don't like to sort of just send them a plan and then sort of send them on their way. And so, yeah, I think it can be a lot of work when you're like tracking blood work and like whether that's come in. And then also a lot of it is actually just researching, because like clients will always like come to you with different things. Maybe they're taking different medications, and you really have to go away and like really like dig deep in the literature and find out, does that interact with this, or how much of this is this effective? So yeah, I think people underestimate how much work goes on in the background when you're working with someone. Like I'll often spend like a couple of hours after consults or even before, just like writing notes and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Do you find a lot of the clients you work with, when are asking them about their diet and their supplements, do you find they're taking like just a lot of supplements, or a lot of supplements they don't know why they're taking them? Or
Yeah, that's the majority for sure. I mean, like most people will try anything if they're feeling unwell, and like a supplement is like an easy option. So yeah, I always find it interesting looking at clients' supplement list when they present it to me. And some people are taking like one or two, and then other people are taking pages. And I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of supplements. You certainly can't supplement your way out of like a bad diet or lifestyle.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of like a balance, because I notice right now in the health community, I just keep an eye on the discussions. And one discussion the last couple of years has been, whole food only, isolated magnesium's not needed because it's an isolate and it's synthetic. And, all we need is whole foods and whole food supplements. But I've seen that not work with so many people.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different forms of things, right? So, and it's not to say that one is inherently better than the other. Like we were just chatting earlier about the kind of whole food vitamin C versus sorbic acid and things. I think it's just important maybe just to clarify the sort of terms of things. So when people are referring to ascorbic acid, they're actually referring to the structure of vitamin C, right? So hydrogens and carbons bonded together. And that is known as ascorbic acid. And that ascorbic acid is present in supplements, and it's also present in food. So that's just the nature of things. However, when we talk about whole food vitamin C, we're talking about ascorbic acid, the structure of vitamin C plus everything else. So I don't know, bioflavonoids, minerals. And then when we're talking about in supplement form, we're just talking about ascorbic acid. So again, it's sort of the debate isn't like whether it's ascorbic acid or not. It's whether it's ascorbic acid or ascorbic acid plus other things. So I think people get quite confused with the terminology. And then, of course, you also have ascorbate chelates and stuff. So like sodium ascorbic acid and all these other ones.
Yeah, and even the ascorbyl radical, and it's interesting. I posted Dr. Robert Seelig. He's been in the space for, I don't know, 10, 15 years talking about heavy metals and mineral balancing. And he posted a video kind of talking about, Linus Pauling and what's his name? Len, who's the big guy? Can't remember his name. All the vitamin C proponents. And basically saying that it acts largely as a pro-oxidant, because people just think of it as an antioxidant, but a lot of its benefits come from its pro-oxidant effects as well.
Yeah, I guess it sort of depends what it is. Like if you're a cancer cell, and the ascorbic acid will be pro-oxidant, and if it's not, then it may be antioxidant. So it has like all these different capacities, just really depending on the state. I mean, I know some people recommend like really large doses, like regularly. That's something I've never explored, but it was really interesting reading some of Doris Lau's articles on that. I know her perspective is that we're surrounded by all this like electromagnetic radiation, right? And it's inducing oxidative stress. So one way around that is to supplement these large doses of it. So that's a whole nother perspective I haven't really heard before. I've definitely been aware of like how much our exposure to non-native electromagnetic like radiation has gone up. But yeah, I mean, I know you've been exploring that recently, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been talking to, like, I just got off the phone with my neighbor this morning. He's been feeling really fatigued. I've been feeling really fatigued. Some of my friends have told me recently as well. And who knows whether it's long COVID or, they're ramping up the Starlink satellite emission. I don't know what's going on, but yeah, it's definitely an issue. And even me living super rural, I think no matter where you are, if you have cell phone reception, which I do here, even though I'm rural, you're getting hit to some degree. So
yeah, there's no escaping it. I mean, they like talk about how much our exposure has sort of gone up over the past like 200 years, and there's not enough zeros in the number to calculate it, right? So, and who are you going to do a control group against? You're going to go find some indigenous tribes and see how they're being affected. So it's really difficult to figure out what is the extent of our, what is the real implications of using this technology so widely. I think that's going to be more and more of a topic as we move forward in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always tell people, like, I know you sell magnesium, like I do, and I always tell people that's the number one thing. And I just did some blood work last week, and I was really happy to see and surprised to see with how I'm feeling that my magnesium is my RBC magnesium 6.4, which is the highest it's ever been.
Wow. I don't think I haven't had a client being that high. So
wow.
your red blood cells are stuffed full of magnesium. Yeah, most of my clients are probably down in like the sort of 4s and 3s. And they also tend to have like quite high excretions on their like HTMAs as well. So, I mean, there's no doubt like all the stress we're under is just driving it straight out.
Yeah, I planned to have one of my friends that I had on the podcast. She just sent me an HTMA kit, and I'm going to have a show on it because I haven't really delved into it, and I've been honestly just really skeptical about hair tissue mineral analysis. And I've heard different things that, basically they burn the hair and it just shows whether you're a slow or fast oxidizer. And then I've had the flip side where they say, they did a test and then they did mineral balancing and then they did another HTMA and it was much better. And the results were expected based on the mineral balancing that they did. So has your experience with it been that it's an accurate test to do?
I mean, I find that when people increase that mineral that they're low in, and then you do another HTMA, I do find that like those ones go up. So at least in my own practice, I observe. However, I don't think you can't use HTMAs to like diagnose things like that. I know some people who may use them to diagnose like hypothyroidism or anything. They're just a way to look at stress patterns, right? So if you're stressed, like minerals come out of the cell, and like sometimes, and also like more than anything, HTMAs are good for acute exposures to things. So like heavy metals and things, and they're like relatively cheap to run. So it's just a nice thing to do to get some form of a baseline. Do I think they tell you exactly how much of any one mineral is in the body? Like, absolutely not. But they can just be like a nice tool to use alongside other tests. And that's why I'll always run the HTMA and the bloods and then maybe some other pieces as well. And that just helps create a picture of someone. And once you join all the pieces together, that's when testing becomes valid.
Yeah, that's a good point. Recently, I've been diving into vitamin D, and it's interesting that, people always say it's a fat soluble vitamin, but measuring the blood is actually accurate because it's not stored in the liver in large amounts like retinol and vitamin E and K2. There's some in the liver, but I think it's stored kind of everywhere and it's circulating. So I like what you said, to kind of look at everything, look at blood work and look at multiple things. Because if you only go off blood work or HTMA, you're only going to get so far, right?
Yeah. And also like blood work's real value is over time. So when you take multiple samples of things, you get to really understand like the picture of someone's health over time. Like if you just do one set, even though it's quite good for like flagging things, like if I do an iron panel and someone's ferritin comes back and it's like 500 and their transferrin saturation is like 70%, then yeah, like let's do the genetic test for hemochromatosis, right? Mm-hmm. So blood work can flag things like sometimes where you might need to act on it more like quickly. Or I might suggest to clients they do an earlier like blood donation, which seems to be helpful with a lot of things.
I'm curious, Matt, what's the lowest saturation percent you've ever seen with a client? It's a random question.
I haven't seen less than say like 18%.
Okay, because last week I'm at 12%. It's kind of
Oh wow, that's very low. That's interesting. What were your other markers looking like?
Ferritin 68, hemoglobin strong, just above
Okay.
15. Serum iron's low at 35.
Hmm.
TIBC is 295. So I've been trying to figure this out because I feel like I over donated this. Like, it was really weird. I donated the first time this year. I felt like Superman. I donated it a second time and I felt drained and I haven't recovered since. So I feel like I
Yeah.
overdid it.
You have to be like, you have to be really careful with the blood donations, right? Like I have much more success with them, like with my male clients than my like female clients. And it's not something I will suggest at the start. Like usually I will usually wait until they're in like a robust enough state to do that. Uh, but I do find they can give immediate relief to even things like histamine, that people like that reaction calms down, right? Um, so it really depends on the individual, and it's not something that you should dive into straight away. Like you really need to make sure you're in the right space for it. Your blood work's looking like that's something that would actually help. I know a lot of people will dive into it too soon and like they'll scare their like adrenal glands completely. They'll just be terrified, like what's happening to me? And so that's just too much. So it really varies from person to person. I think it's something I'm more aware of with my clients who live in countries with the iron fortification program in place. Yeah, I was like you. I grew up on fortified Shreddies and Cheerios just every day. I used to get through like a box of them. So whenever I donate, I always feel better because I just know that I've got a lot in storage. So yeah, I think it's just one of those things where you just have to tread carefully.
Mm-hmm. And I'd imagine the frequency too, because here in the States, we can go every 56 days to donate. And I know in Canada, it's longer. I think it's every 3 or 4 months or something. And is that something you find changes with clients if maybe once a year is good for certain people?
Yeah, like absolutely. Like for men, like, 2 or 3 times is fine. You just have to feel out what feels right. I mean, I'm not going to suggest like a blood donation to like a female client of mine who's having a heavy bleed every month and they're already feeling exhausted. That's the last thing I'm going to be doing. So yeah, I think I don't think you have to set this amount every year and say I'm doing the maximum 4 per year. I just tend to book it in when I've got a quiet space and like, because you need to be like nice and relaxed for it because it can be quite stressful. I have a lot of clients who are worried about needles and just making sure that you're prepared for it. Like I think it's good to have something salty and sugary before. Make sure you've eaten a nice meal. And then I do have some clients who can't donate at the hospital for like various reasons. And so I have a private phlebotomist who will come around and also you can just take less and you can do it in the comfort of your own home. I don't think you have to take the full, 500 mil or so.
Yeah, it's a good amount of blood. Have you found any of your clients were actually deficient in iron and anemic? Like you mentioned, heavy women that are heavy bleeding. Because I know, like, there's some perspective that there's no such thing as anemia and it doesn't exist. But like a woman at the grocery store that I frequent, she said she got a blood transfusion and it absolutely changed her life. Like her energy went through the roof and was sustained after she got the transfusion. And I just hear stories like that. And it's so contrary to what I hear from the RCP that I can't gaslight that person and say, your experience was false because she obviously felt better. And I'm standing there face to face with her and she's telling me a blood transfusion helped. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think it just really depends. Like I've had clients with very low iron and I'll just suggest that they, increase their consumption of things like red meat. I maybe combine that with some vitamin C to increase your absorption. And I'll work on the copper. But I do find that the copper is just in some ways safer because of how well it does regulate your iron stores. So I tend to just do all three. Like if someone is really anemic, then I'll like make sure they're getting enough dietary heme iron plus getting the copper rich foods, and that just tends to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was wondering the other day if that's why the carnivore diet's so popular recently. Is it's such a great source of iron, and if someone has a parasite infection that's been chronic for decades, or intestinal bleeding, which is fairly common, or colon cancer, or some sort of intestinal issue, that internal bleeding could really tax their iron over time. I've been studying that.
Yeah, you could have all sorts of issues going on in the gut that like affect your absorption. So there's a good chance that you could be eating like a lot and not actually absorbing that much, for sure. But I think I just generally find that when someone starts to really get their copper foods up, things start to just work a lot better. I think I would always choose dietary sources of iron over, say, like a supplement, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard mixed things about the iron supplements. Like, was it ferrous sulfate? I think is the most common one used. And
yeah, they're not very pleasant on the gut either. Like, I have a lot of clients who have come from using them, and it really just wrecked their guts. And like, it's hard to find like a nice form of it.
Yeah, because what I was listening to a lecture yesterday on YouTube of a guy talking about the benefits of oral iron supplementation, and he was basically saying if someone has an intestinal infection, it can make it worse, right? Like a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or something. Like, you kind of want to take care of that first.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to feed the pathogen, right? Because all critters are going to want to get their hands on that iron. So I think it's really important that your gut's in the right place, for sure. I mean, that's just step one of anything.
Mm-hmm. So before we started recording, Matt, you were telling me about IFS. Can you break down what that is? And
yeah, so I guess this is a little bit away from nutrition, but IFS is it's called internal family systems, and it's kind of like it's a model of therapy that I just like some of the questions that IFS proposes. So it's a bit of a paradigm shift that in IFS you have like a self, and then you have all of your parts, right? So you might have an anxious part, an angry part, a sad part, and things like that. And it's really about understanding what is the like positive intention of all your parts. And I think this is something that people, especially in the health world, because I have a lot of clients who are really anxious about their health, just getting like people to understand like what is actually the positive intention of that anxious part. Because often when we get like flooded with these feelings we don't like, maybe we're like really worried about our health and things, we just tend to think of it as like a negative feeling. But if you actually thought about it, when we have anxiety about our health and things, it's actually trying to do something for us, right? It's trying to protect us from making the same mistakes again, and so on and so forth. I just like some of the questions that it proposes because it tends to open the field up a little bit with people. It tends to give them a bit more flexibility to think about things, because often we just get into I'm angry, or I'm anxious, or I'm this, and it's like in IFS you would try and get the person to identify like what is the intention, and so on and so forth, because we all have those parts, right? We all have like critical parts. I should do this, I should be getting up, I should be taking these supplements and all that. And then the other part is like, oh, it's not going to do anything. So you immediately have a lot of conflict with your parts, basically. And this is what I observe with clients, is they have a lot of conflict between their parts. One part's telling them to do this, one part's telling them to do that. And the point of IFS is really about trying to be curious about those parts' intentions and trying to just talk with them almost one-on-one. And I find that can just relax things back a little bit, for people. So yeah, I just think it's a really interesting model. I have a lot of family members who are practitioners in it, and I just think it's a nice model that's not like trying to give the client coping mechanisms necessarily. So I know there's a lot of like techniques out there, say like CBT and things, and like EFT and things, and like they can be good for maybe helping you when you're having a particular like moment. But generally, I find that if you don't really if you're not really curious about what the part's intention is for you and trying to get to know it a bit, parts just tend to get louder as we get older, because the part is frozen in the time which it was anxious or something. So the part doesn't know that you're an adult now. So unless you go back and actually find out and be curious about it, then that part just gets frozen and it doesn't really realize that you're basically an adult. So yeah, that's kind of like a brief overview of it. And I often recommend clients do some IFS alongside, because I just find it's really great to have that sort of integrative approach. Like, health is so much more than just like nutrition and things. I wish all of my clients could do IFS, regular body work, and have a coach alongside seeing me. That would just be amazing. Like, I think that is the future of medicine, to have all of these approaches together.
That's awesome. When you say coach alongside you, what do you mean?
I think just someone that can almost just for like motivation and like accountability. Obviously, I will do a bit of that with clients myself anyway, but I think this is where coaches have a bit of a spot there, is just to kind of motivate people along the way, because that's not something that I can do all the time for clients. And I really just do see the benefits of having all of these things like tied in. I'm a huge fan of things like regular body work. I think it's so underrated for like health generally.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think the internet and social media has created more of a need for this? Because I get a lot of messages from people. They're like, when I change my mind on something, because they're looking for the guru to follow 100%. And they're like, now I'm so confused. It's like, well,
yeah,
what's my goal?
Well, I think you're a bit like me, is that you're a bit of a like guinea pig where you like to try things on yourself. And I guess you're just documenting your journey, right? And I'm the same really on my page. When I like try something, I'll just write about it. And people are always looking for concrete answers in nutrition. This has been going on for a long time, right? And it's just one of those things where nothing is black or white. And I did a podcast a few years ago, and one of the first things I said was, in nutrition, you have to be open to having your like strongest beliefs broken down and then built back up again regularly. You cannot get too tied into something. And I see a lot of practitioners who will get really stuck in a rut using the same things. And it's so important that you just keep up to date with the research, because research is coming out all the time, and you have to just like be on that and just seeing where things are going. I did a post a while ago called The Translational Gap, where I was talking about how it takes around 10 years for information to be passed down and be like available to the public in a kind of usable fashion. So what the public are being fed is it's almost never like right. I mean, you only have to look at like the food pyramid, right? So it's one of those things where like people are desperate for answers, right? And again, like when I work with someone, I just try and give them their kind of unique plan that's only applicable to them.
That's awesome. Have you looked into or had experience with, Matt, like dream therapy or lucid dreaming? Because that to me, that's been invaluable for my emotional development or working through traumas. I've used that in my life multiple times, and it seems like it's made a permanent change.
Yeah, I've never really got into any of the sort of dream work. My mother was quite involved with a lot of that work with a teacher called Marion Woodman, who was like a Canadian poet. And she did a lot of work in like dream stuff, like dream therapy. It's something that I've never really explored. Like I'm always terrible at like writing down my dreams, because I think they're like really important to document. I think they can tell you a lot about like the kind of things that are going on in your life and perhaps where you should direct your energy. I remember someone telling me that everyone in your dream is you, like a part of you. And I always thought that was quite an interesting concept.
Yeah. Some people believe that this is just another dream, and this reality is but I think it's called solipsism or something. It's basically, the Matrix. which I don't know if I subscribe to that, but
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? I mean, it's definitely something I'd like to explore a bit more, but I always just find that in the morning I just wake up and I get swept away with work before I can really think about what happens. I mean, do you find that like when you're more stressed, you dream more?
I find it to be actually the opposite. Oh, I have done a lot of experiments to increase my dream recall because 99% of the time I don't remember any of my dreams. And I know if I eat salmon for dinner and or take vitamin B6, but eating salmon is the most power, or any cold water seafood. There's something about that. I don't know if it's the selenium, the iodine, the protein, the omegas. I don't know what it is, but just eating cold water fish before bed, I'll usually remember my dream if I do that.
That's interesting. I do find that if I eat like too much dairy, like close to bed, I always get really strange dreams. So that's always a weird one. But yeah, I mean, there might be something in that. I mean, maybe you're getting more minerals from the seafood and that's causing something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you had clients come to you that use psychedelics to try to work through some stuff? Because I interviewed Hamid, the mineral shaman on my show, and he was talking about psychedelic use. You know, ayahuasca is really popular now, and magic mushrooms are legal now in multiple states in the US, I think. And he was talking about how that imbalances minerals and that'll deplete, magnesium, copper, and other things.
I think they definitely have their place. Like it's a shame that all the research on psychedelics and things like depression got shut down. And now it's just, there was this huge gap where it just wasn't allowed. And now it's suddenly being used again because there was so much promising literature on it, right? Like things like psilocybin in mushrooms have like enormous uses for mental health. And if we just could harness them in full and do the research, then I think they would be like amazing and much safer than things like SSRIs, which, as we know, they've just recently been proven to be absolutely bogus.
Yeah, that's such an interesting one because I've talked about serotonin a little bit on this show, and the amino acid for the audience, and you probably know this, but tryptophan goes to serotonin, converts to melatonin, and recently I've been experimenting intermittently with 5-HTP supplement, and I track my sleep with the Aura Ring, and it seems to help, which is interesting. But maybe I'm just converting that serotonin to melatonin.
Yeah. Who knows? Like I did that post recently on melatonin and things, and I think that's like a really interesting field of work. I think with the whole serotonin side of things, I think it got so rushed into the public domain that there was this biochemical imbalance in depression and things, that it just immediately just got accepted. And like, there's a good book called The Inflamed Mind that talks about this, about how like no one knew, like early on, no one was testing you to see if you had low serotonin. They were just giving it to you on the assumption you had it. Like, who knows? So yeah, I mean, it might be that it's converting to melatonin. I think certainly melatonin there's been some amazing research in regard to inhibiting like viral replication. I certainly would consider using it with like family members and myself if I got very sick, because I think the research is really strong. And also some of the dosages, being used have been really, really large, like hero doses, like 200 milligrams and things. I didn't think that was even possible. But after reading that like interesting paper on it that I posted about a while ago, it's really changed my perspective on it. And I do wonder, what were like humans' melatonin levels before we had all this artificial light? Like this is a question I often ask myself. I kind of think, God, if artificial light really inhibits melatonin that much, is this something that we need to seriously be considering taking? Because like melatonin was probably one of humans' earliest defenses against viruses. It's probably one of the reasons why we're here today. It's one of the most powerful hormones and sort of redox balances that that we have available to us. And I think the fact that it's made inside every cell that has a mitochondria just proves how essential it is. But like one of the problems with melatonin is getting the dosage right is so fiddly that like some people who don't get on well with a little bit get on a lot with more. I know there was a lot of fear around, does melatonin interfere with your hormones like testosterone? But then there's other research that suggests that it can actually facilitate the production of some hormones. So I'm definitely no like melatonin expert or anything, but I think this whole light idea has really made me think twice that maybe this really is something that we need to be having on hand, like for the future, which is going to be very bright and full of all sorts of what, you know?
Yeah. And you brought up redox balancer. Like I think Doris Lowe has a lot of published research that she's written on melatonin for, as you said, viruses, especially melatonin with ascorbic acid. She says both of them.
Yeah, she likes both of those.
And yeah, I thought I had heard from her that it's not just the light, but like EMF exposure decreases your melatonin production, which even if you're wearing blue blockers, you're still getting exposed to EMFs.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Like how much were we making before all of this? Like, this is a question I often just think about, because if we're exposed to all the time, then you've inherently the whole human immune system has basically been dampened down. And I know she actually suggests that like ultimately all the artificial light and all the low melatonin has been one of the key drivers in why people were getting sick with COVID. So for her, that was a really big like piece of the puzzle. Yeah, it's a really tough one. And again, it's just one of those things where I think more and more research will sort of come around with it. I've been experimenting on and off for like a couple of years now, but I've always been a bit afraid about taking some of those larger doses. I'm just not sure like if that's something I'd want to do. And sometimes if I take like a little bit too much, I can almost feel a bit agitated in the morning. I feel like I've slept. I definitely find that it can improve heart rate variability. That's something I noticed with myself and with clients, that like my heart rate variability went up by like 20 points after I started taking it. So that was like a really interesting observation. And I had other clients say that as well. I don't think heart rate variability is like this super amazing like indicator of your ability to respond to stress, but it is one. And I do find that when the body is under a lot of stress, it will be lower. So yeah, I think it's I mean, do you track your heart rate variability a lot?
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's been pretty bad. And according to people I've shown it to, I mean, it varies the average, throughout the night with the Oura Ring. That I think it's average 40 to 50 or something like that. But yeah, I've heard from a couple people that it's not. One of my friends said she dove into the literature and it's not as clear cut as they make it out to be. Like you said, it's just one marker.
Yeah, I don't think it's. I know some people who really hold it up as the ultimate marker of like resilience to stress, but I've had days where I've had a terrible night's sleep and felt really rubbish, and my heart rate variability has been like really high, and I'm like, is that right?
That's interesting though, that it can improve HRV. I haven't noticed that, but maybe I haven't taken enough. I think the maximum I've ever taken was like around 300 milligrams before bed.
Wow, 300. That is a hero dose. That is a major hero dose. What sort of things did you experience on that?
I was just a little groggy in the morning. And Doris says this, if you take too much, you'll know because you just feel more groggy. So lower the dose. So that's how you can find your ideal dose is. And I think I feel pretty good on 60. But if I take 5 or 10, I don't really feel anything.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think like melatonin for younger people is a bit more fiddly because again, this is why I wouldn't suggest people just dive in and start taking it, like, work with someone so they can figure out what's right for you. But for older people, like over 60, you produce basically negligible amounts. So you've just lost this amazing antiviral hormone redox balancer. So I definitely think that for older adults, I think it's like almost a no-brainer to have a little bit at least. Just so, yeah, I don't think you have to take huge amounts, but just to kind of gently maybe like restart your own production. I mean, I don't know if there's any evidence that taking it can like kind of start your endogenous supply of it. I mean, someone commented on my post the other day saying, if I take it, is it going to stop me making it? And this is a question I often get asked about everything, like digestive enzymes. If I take them, and it's like, well, ultimately for older people, we're trying to combat the effects of aging. So even if hypothetically it meant that you stopped making some digestive enzymes or melatonin, that doesn't really matter, because I'm just trying to get you to assimilate your food. Like, this is the most important thing. So if it means you have to take this, then so be it. That's the most important thing. But I think it's very difficult to figure out whether if you take something, it's going to stop your own supply. I probably would say not, given that, every cell has the ability to basically produce it.
Yeah, I think I've only heard that with like TRT, right? Testosterone therapy, and was it human growth hormone and certain things?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really explored like the whole like TRT thing. I mean, I just find that like boron is great for testosterone. That's kind of my favorite one. And like if I'm working with guys and I feel like they're just on the low side, boron is just great for that. I just find borons are great for all hormones. And it's like, I know there's all these gym guys who are trying to figure out, I mean, what was that new one that people were talking about? That form of testosterone. I can't remember what it was called now.
I haven't heard of that one.
There are all these different names of different ones that people are trying to use. And I'm like, well, just try and support your endocrine system through other things. I don't think you have to take these ultra, strange sources of things.
Well, I have your article pulled up here on vitamin K, and it's a really good read. And I like that near the end, you talked about testosterone production in the testing.
Yeah, vitamin K is good for that. Yeah. Yeah. Who's the lady who wrote that really great book? I got a lot of the knowledge from that. What's her name?
The French.
I think she's French. Yeah.
K2 and the calcium paradox or something.
Yeah. That is a no-brainer, that book to read. Yeah. So I think like K2 has like a lot of uses, again, for testosterone production, and again, for things like calcification. I use K2 a lot in practice. I think it's really underrated. Obviously, there is a lot of fear around it. Like people think, oh, am I going to get like a blood clot and stuff? Or if I'm taking this, and again, this is why you should just like work with a practitioner so they can find out if it's right for you.
What do you think about the philosophy, Matt? Like, I've been kind of meditating on this the last few days, because I notice whatever little camp, whether it's the Ray Peters, the Morley Robbins people, or whatever little camp, that there's like fear about certain supplements that they're going to cause XYZ condition. Let's just take vitamin D3, for example, cholecalciferol. But I've been kind of meditating on, well, what if someone has enough vitamin A coming in, enough vitamin K2, enough vitamin E, and like all the fat soluble vitamins at once, and maybe they're bumping up one, like I did with cod liver oil, taking massive doses of cod liver oil earlier this year. But I was also taking K2 and E to make sure that I didn't get, vitamin A toxicity. I'm wondering if all these toxicities are just an imbalance of, the cofactors,
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. That I think more than anything, like the toxicity comes from just things being, there's like a large discrepancy between things. Like everything, like in the body, everything is in touch with everything else, right? There's like nothing is in isolation like allopathic medicine sees it. So I think it's really difficult to gauge, like when you look at toxicity research, that data you're just not going to have on what were the levels of other things, and they're usually just really strange studies on taking isolated amounts. So yeah, I think especially with the fat soluble like vitamins, you really want to make sure they're all in balance, they're all doing their own little thing. I think the hardest thing is just knowing how much is really in storage. Like unless we start like chopping people up and doing biopsies and things, we're just never going to know. Like I certainly find with like vitamin D that I've had a number of clients where say they've had a low 2.5 and say a high like 1.25, so like classic inflammatory response, that I've worked on like resolving the underlying inflammation and what's driving it. And then the like 2,5 naturally just sort of comes up without increasing, say, their sun exposure. And so like sometimes that's something I observe, and that's not even, they didn't have to take any vitamin D supplements for that necessarily. So I think it's really hard, like, to know how much is in like the fat cell, like how much is in like the adipose tissue, how much do we actually store over winter. And you've done some podcasts on like on the genetic side as well, which is another interesting side of things. I definitely have more and more clients just sending me their genetic profiles as standard now. Like they just email them me with the opener email. So which is great. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think more and more this is just going to be a thing now where all practitioners will just have that on hand.
Yeah, that's when this posts, it's the week before I interviewed the founder of Decode, and it's pretty interesting what they're doing over there using, AI, basically algorithms to analyze tons of clinical research and stay up to date to the latest ones, and then building that into this platform to like look at all the millions of mutations that exist. And it's exciting to see where that field will be in 5 or 10 years, because it's just the more data we have, like the more accurate it'll be. Because right now it's like, I have a higher risk for lupus, and it's like certain things.
Yeah, I feel like with the whole like SNP thing, it's one of those things where it is a very deep rabbit hole. I've had some people say that like SNPs are the genetic industry's last ditch effort to prove nature over nurture, right? And I think SNPs are definitely valid, like there's no doubt. But I do find that sometimes you wonder, like you get your report and you have all these SNPs and you're like, how on earth did humans survive if we've got all of these SNPs, right? You start to think, you have to kind of just remember that you're here and you're alive, because it can be a bit overwhelming. I mean, sometimes they use Prometheus, which is where you can upload your data to, and you start, I mean, if you upload your data to that, you'll be diagnosed with every disease on the planet in a second. You'll be like, I'm going to die tomorrow, I'm going to have a heart attack. So you have to tread carefully with the SNPs. I think one thing I think to remember is that, especially with the mental health side of things, is that sometimes I've had clients where they've said, like, my genetic shows that I'm basically depressed and it runs in my family, and that's it. And that's quite a self-fulfilling sort of prophecy. So you have to be careful with the whole genetics things, that you don't adopt that profile, and that, ultimately you can control a lot of these things with proper like therapy and like nutrition, right? So I will say, when people do get their results, it's just to not, look at it with someone, and don't get too overwhelmed with like buying into this kind of story about you, because there's definitely more to it than just that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Joe said he like fixed his mood or something, but he said it's just about being aware, and then just changing things up so that you're aware of these things.
Yeah, I think it's just like, you don't want to get into the thing where you're saying, I'm inherently an anxious person, right? Because I have SNPs here. I think you need to just think of it like, okay, I might be a bit more like susceptible to that, but that's not going to mean I'm going to be like this forever. And there's things I can do, right? So, but yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that these, single nucleotide polymorphism have a role in neurotransmitter synthesis, right? And these are all governing things like our mood and our feelings. So people may bind more, they may bind less. And I think as the field progresses, it'll get a lot more clearer, because every SNP has like a weight of evidence to it, right? So this is why it gets confusing. Like, there's all these SNPs and they all have different weights. So some of them have a lot of evidence, some of them have less evidence. So this is why it's important that just to kind of stay with it. And as things progress, we'll have a lot better understanding about which ones are having more of a sort of powerful impact. But I think we have a lot of data already, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, the vitamin A thing was super accurate for me, because it said I have higher needs. And I know some people I've spoken with feel bad on cod liver oil, or they develop something. And for me, it's like the more I take, the better I feel.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, the diet. I mean, I think on my genetic report, mine actually flagged for copper and vitamin K. I did look at some of the references to the SNPs, and one of them for copper was like selenium binding protein 1. I wasn't quite sure on the connection, but I have certainly found that whenever I do my blood work, my copper and ceruloplasmin are always really low. They just are. So that does line up a little bit with that. And I've definitely been working on increasing that. And I do feel better the more like copper I generally include in my diet. So there's definitely something there. Yeah, and with the whole vitamin A thing, I think again, it's like you're looking at this enzyme, right? Like how much is being converted. And I think that one in particular really varies when I've looked at clients' reports. Like some people really don't convert any, like as little as 1%, right? So, you know, in those cases, like a vegan diet would be a disaster, because if you're just having the kind of the proforms, then you're just not going to be getting enough.
Right. Yeah, that was me for several years. Kind of scary to think about.
Yeah, we've all done it. I mean, I did it as well. I went down, I did the plant-based thing, then I did like the keto thing, and I tried them all.
Did you ever do fruitarian?
No, but I had a few clients who have tried it and actually felt really good doing it. They had nothing but great things to say about it, which is interesting because it just seems like it seems so extreme.
It's interesting because, yeah, I know carbohydrates spare protein, right? Like your protein requirements go down if you're eating a lot of carbohydrates. And yeah, I remember for a long span of time, I was just eating bananas and oranges for lunch. I mean, I would alternate, but
Wow.
I would just, bring in 8 bananas for lunch and that would be it.
Wow, you just loading up on the fruit. I mean, how was your like bowel? Was your stomach okay?
It felt good. I mean, I just felt kind of airy. I definitely wasn't grounded, but I felt my mood was great. My energy was great. I had endurance.
Yeah.
Didn't really have strength, but I had endurance.
I think like it's really interesting. I've just observed in practice that everyone has a slightly different their bodies get on better with different macronutrient distributions. So I know some people who just get on better with like a bit more fat and less on the carbs. I definitely get on better with like a higher protein and like a moderate amount of carbohydrates and like a little bit of fat. And then I have some clients that just generally feel better, like having a bit more fat in their diet, and like less carbohydrates. So I think it's really important to just like honor each one, because we all have a slightly different sort of preference and also just background as well. So yeah, I think one of the things is that a lot of these groups or organizations will often promote like higher amounts. Like if you suddenly jumped on the Ray Peat diet, you might end up just feeling really rubbish because you've just increased your carbohydrates so high. So I think if you're going to do that, just like go slowly, right? Just build up and like see if that feels right for you.
Did you ever go down the white sugar rabbit hole? Because that stuff, I know recently, people have been saying that's white iron. It's been pretty heavily demonized. The refined, sugar, sucrose, and I'm just not convinced that it's inherently toxic.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, sugar is a form of energy, and the body needs energy. So this is just how can something inherently be bad? My thing is that a lot of my clients have like blood sugar problems, so it would not be good for them to have loads of white sugar to start, because they would just be a bit all over the place. So I'm okay with sugar if it's like after you've had some proteins, generally speaking. I'm not a huge fan of having isolated sugar on its own, because I just don't find, I mean, I personally don't feel very good on it, and like my clients seem to respond well. But again, this reductive narrative of sugar is bad. And at the end of the day, it's just about energy and like how well your blood sugar is responding and like building up slowly and things like that. So the situation is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And as far as fats, it seems like you've gone down the unsaturated fat versus saturated fat. And Something I've been thinking about lately, especially with the genetic stuff, is I'm wondering if some people might do better with more unsaturated than saturated fat. Not to say that, you know, they don't need any, they don't need to supplement vitamin E. And I think there's a lot of context. Like if someone was eating more unsaturated than saturated fat, I think it would be wise for them to supplement vitamin E every day.
Yeah, I think, I mean, all fats in nature will have a combination of like different saturation like bonds, right? So I think generally speaking, like saturated fat is always going to be like the safest fat, just if you're just talking about it purely from a biochemistry point of view. But I think some people may feel a bit better with the unsaturated fats. I mean, again, it's just one of those things where you just have to kind of feel out and just see what works for you. I'm just not like just generally a huge fan of fat in general, like having like just too much of it. I just find that it can cause and when I talk about fat, I'm not talking about, fat on like some meat or anything. I'm talking about like just having a lot of oil and just things like that. I just find that that's just quite hard on the body. So yeah, again, I think it just really varies just from person to person. But I think generally speaking, your predominant one should be the saturated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. For some reason, I just, when I eat a steak, I do a grass-fed like top sirloin steak on the grill, and I just give the fat to my cats or my chickens because I just prefer the leanness. I don't really like the fat on the steak, and I kind of an individual thing.
Yeah, I think also I think you kind of have to listen to your own sort of internal cues and like kind of listen to what feels right. Like I try and feel out what I actually need in a day. Like when I wake up, I'm like, does liver feel right today or not? And like try and listen to that, because I think we're so detached from our natural bodily cues now that we can't even identify what actually feels right. We're just like, I've been told that's good for me, I'll take that. But you should just really listen to like what actually feels right. Like if you're feeling the urge to like increase your carbohydrates, or maybe you want some more iron rich foods or whatever, then just do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you eat any pasta or spaghetti or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I eat like I eat like a little bit of bread and stuff, and pasta now and then. It doesn't make me feel great when I have it necessarily. I tend to just feel like fairly bloated. But like, who's going to give up like pasta and bread? Nobody. I mean, I would never give up sourdough bread for nobody, not even for a bit of bloating.
Yeah, there's an interesting perspective. My friend Tyler has this, that nobody should eat gluten, period, ever. And I recently did like a genetics consult a couple days ago, and he was saying people either have farmers genetics or like hunter genetics. I had never heard this concept, and he said I have farmers genetics, which means that I do better than a lot of people on grains. I feel good on meat too. But he was saying I could just digest grains a lot easier than other people.
Yeah, I do find, there's it's a bit like the blood type diet. They talk a bit about which people do what. And, I do find that certain blood types do seem to do better with a bit more vegetarian diet. Like, I think type A is the more veggie one. I think, is that right?
Yeah, I'm O positive. And I feel if I can eat a steak a day, that's ideal. I feel amazing.
Yeah. So, yeah, there might be something to that. I mean, it's hard to say. I like whether I think it's one of those things where you also have to factor in like the pleasure of eating something as well. Like if you say something like, you should never eat that, and say you're with like family and you're having like a really nice experience and you're having a bit of pasta and something, and like I think sometimes we just underrate that whole experience. You can't live your life constantly trying to seek like this like perfectionism. That's just another part in IFS, like trying to make you to do something. You have to really try and like enjoy things, because that's also just really great for your health, just to be having a pleasurable experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now my genetics is right. I'm like almost 50% Italian. So there's that.
Yeah. I think when I did mine was like, there was some, it was like Eastern Europe and other parts. I'm not really sure on the ancestry thing, like how accurate it is. But it's just a bit of fun, really, isn't it? You're trying to think, oh, well, I've got a bit of this in me, I've got a bit of this in me.
Right. Yeah, I recently did one, living DNA, and they have like a Viking option. So to see what percent Viking you are.
Really. You can also figure out like how much Neanderthal you are.
Right.
I'm like, damn, I'm like 2% more Neanderthal than my dad. What does that mean? Does that mean I have a lower IQ or? Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I think over time they'll build up a much bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do worry sometimes about all the, like where's all the data going?
Mm-hmm. Right. Let's see. I mean, I think this is kind of I've never done an interview this way, but this is kind of a fun way to do it. Just kind of going through your blogs and just hitting different topics.
Yeah, why not? I mean, I think also we have like a lot of similar interests. Obviously we both are making supplements, which is really interesting. It's like, so, I mean, how have you found that whole side of things?
As far as
in terms of like, do you find because I find, I mean, it might just be like the factory that I'm working with, but often it's just really hard to get hold of certain things. Like we can't manufacture boron glycinate here or in Europe. It's just weird reasons like that. So I've just found it a bit difficult at times to get hold of things.
Interesting. I haven't found that here in the States, unless it's something international. Like I've been going through it with my shilajit resin tablets. I just actually posted, just because, the war, quote unquote, with Russia, whatever's going on politically.
Yeah. Because yours is the same as mine from the Altai Mountains, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't looked into getting another stock, and I'm really worried that when I make the contact, they're going to be like, it's going to cost you this much, because it's really, things. I had to raise my prices the other day because it's mad, like how expensive things are getting. Like if energy prices go up, then everything else is affected, like buying mineral chelates, manufacturing glass bottles, printing labels. And so my factory let me know the other day that like all the prices will be going up, and they've just like told me what the new things are going to be. So yeah, it's crazy how expensive things are getting.
Well, it's cool that you use one, pouches, and I'm working towards making mine more sustainable. Like I'm hoping in the next 6 months to a year I could switch away from plastic to like hemp plastic or something like that. I mean, I still think it's a drop in the bucket, but over time, it's a lot of plastic.
Yeah, I really like the glass jars just to have them on hand, and then I like the refills. You could get some refills like that I'm doing that are made from, they're just biodegradable patches made from like sugar cane, I think.
That's cool.
They do sort of degrade after a while. And they're kind of hard to identify sometimes when you're shifting through all of your layers of supplements. But yeah, and also they're just much more convenient because they can go through the letterbox. So that would be something that would be like always really good, because often people will have to be in to like answer for a supplement because it can't fit through there.
Mm-hmm. Well, it looks like you share my passion for magnesium and shilajit, because those seem to be like two pretty universal supplements that almost everyone can benefit from, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't make energy without magnesium, right? I think it's just getting the dosage right. And I think this is where I like parts of the RCP, that you start with the adrenals. I think that's really important, that you have your potassium and sodium at the right level before you kind of introduce the larger doses of magnesium. And also I'm a really big fan of like trying different options of magnesium. So I think if you're starting out, like start with the transdermal. I think that you can have like amazing benefits with that, doing just having like a bath like once a week with some magnesium flakes. And like some people do just tend to absorb more via the skin than in their stomach.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I can't imagine not taking it. Like it's one of these things that once you start to include, you kind of think, I couldn't come off it now.
Yeah, when I started supplementing magnesium bicarbonate, I was making it out of my RV and selling it to people, the liquid magnesium. I didn't know about the magnesium or the potassium connection. And like you said, the adrenal cocktail. And I probably would have got better results, but just bumping up magnesium, I think, helped. It's just retaining it. You need, potassium and boron, and there's all these components, right?
Yeah. I find that once you introduce the boron, then you can lower the magnesium dosage, right? Because it's like you should be retaining more of it. Again, it's like another one where that's also a difficult thing to track how much is in the body. I know that like red blood cell is the best kind of rough marker we have, but sometimes I've seen test results where people have never supplemented anything and they're like above 6, and I think, how is that possible? But again, it's just a way to look at like stress really more than anything else. I also think it's really important to try different forms, maybe even in isolation first, and just to see like how you respond. And I think it's really important to consider like what that magnesium's bound to. So like I really like magnesium malate because it's got that malic acid in, so that can bind to other things like aluminium and also help with things like maybe like gallstones and things. So you get like a double benefit there.
That's really interesting about malic acid, because when people ask me about aluminum, I tell them about living silica, like liquid silica is a specific form of it that's really effective. But that's pretty cool that malic acid also binds to aluminum.
Yeah, it's got like a fair amount of binding capacity. So yeah, it's like one of those things where you just have to think about what are the other benefits. Like obviously if you take magnesium glycinate, then you're going to have that glycine in there, and like glycine's great. Like we could all use more glycine. As you were saying, like maybe it's our defense against glyphosate.
Yeah.
I can't remember who was originally talking about that. It was a lady. I can't remember her name. She's friends with Morley.
Stephanie Seneff.
Yeah, she's written some really interesting articles. Yeah, she's like an avid researcher as well.
Yeah, and I noticed you sell organic kelp at Bladderwrack.
Bladderwrack, yeah.
For iodine, and that's something else that came up in my genetics. It said higher iodine need, and I think Mr. Megadoser, he makes me look like a joke with megadosing Jason Hommel. I think
some of the dosages I've seen have been wild. The thing is, I think you have to be careful with iodine for sure, because you don't want to. But then again, like people who have been exposed to a lot of fluorides, like in America, you guys have had it bad with fluoride. Like we're just kind of getting into it here. The government are like, yeah, we're just going to put it in now and like just shove it in there. But I know the US has like been avidly fluoridating the water, so like maybe to try and displace that, maybe you really do need more. But certainly when I work with clients, I'll always work with like the whole food forms first, and just kind of like keep an eye on things and just check that like their thyroid antibodies aren't getting too high, because you don't want to like aggravate things too much, because the thyroid is very sensitive to like everything. Like it's the first thing to respond to that when we're stressed, like, and so I think it's just important to start slow with these things.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's funny. I just search random podcasts, and I'll just search up iodine on the podcast app and listen to random shows. And, a lot of people say it's the most important thing for the thyroid, it's because they say, tyrosine and iodine makes thyroid hormone, but, there's the liver involvements and,
of course. Yeah.
Keto and
there's so many things. And like, just again, like things like selenium, like you need that to convert to the active form. So like iodine is like the kind of easy one to jump to with like thyroid, right? Because it's like, there it is, it's like T3, T4. But I think all the other factors are like really beneficial, and perhaps even more important. But again, it's getting a dosage right. Like a lot of the researchers, a lot of the key, like I can't remember the guy, I read his book a while ago. He's like one of the big guys in the sort of iodine world. I think,
Brownstein or?
Yeah, Brownstein. Yeah, I've read some of his books, and like he's just like avid on obviously using it. But then you hear other perspectives where they're like, oh no, you shouldn't use it. So I think it's really hard to like say whether it's the right thing. I know like Brownstein talks a lot about just its uses in terms of displacing other halogens is like the key thing. So using it for like pre-pregnancy to help to make sure the body's in the right state. I personally like haven't got to that point in my practice where I'd feel comfortable like using like just iodine on its own. It's just not something I would be comfortable doing at the moment. But you know, like fair enough to people who want to take their health into their own hands and take these dosages. I mean, my hat goes on to them. It's a very brave thing to do.
I mean, it's probably safer than taking T3, right? Because I played around with that and just got, you know, kind of increased heart rate. And, you know, I mean, I know it balances itself out, but before recommending T3 to someone, I'd probably recommend iodine.
Yeah, I've never tried T3. Like obviously I know like in the sort of Ray Peat community, he's quite big on like using it for different things. I would be curious to try it for sure, just to see how it actually feel and whether I would just be like really hyped up. But I think it would probably hype me up too much. Like even coffee makes me like pretty, you know, almost a bit too. I mean, I know I'm a slow metabolizer of coffee as well, so like that's one of the things where if I have it after like midday, like even like that will affect me for that night.
Wow. Do you drink coffee every day, or you kind of pulse it?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes I say I should have a little break, but I just have my 2 a day and that just feels right. I think it's one of those things where I think Ray Peat said this, that you like maybe need less coffee when you're younger and it has more of its use when you're older. So when your thyroid's slowing down, it can be useful to kind of like give you that added energy. I haven't had a day off it for like a long time now. I just love it too much. It's just a great thing. Like it's such a nice little ritual in the morning, like making it and stuff, and like adding in things and also trying different combinations. Like I love having it with like raw milk and stuff. It's one of life's greatest pleasures.
You know, what's interesting, Matt, like you often hear that, you know, oh, it's a stimulant. And when you quit it or take a break, get ready for the withdrawals. You're going to experience headaches and, you know, especially day 3 or 4, it peaks. And I heard all these things and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take a week off and just hit the adrenal cocktail hard. And I did this, you know, several months ago.
Yeah, I remember you posting about that.
Yeah, and I didn't feel any side effect. And after, you know, 7-8 days, my body was like, oh, have some coffee. I was like, all right. But I didn't get one headache. I didn't feel irritable. I didn't have poor sleep. No side effects from. It was my first break in several years.
Yeah, I think it's so individual. Like I was recently in Bulgaria, like working and like traveling. There was lots of people who were doing remote work there, and there's loads of people like discussing. Like they were like, "I'm on day 2 coming off coffee. It's awful. Like, I can't even see properly." So people have all sorts of strange reactions, right? So I think it's just down to like each person. I think if you are like really stressed and maybe you've come from a really stressful period, then I wouldn't recommend. I would just hold off for a while and just make sure like your foundations are in place. Like you don't need to jump on having like coffee when your adrenals are already like pumping into overdrive.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just a recent blood test. I don't know how accurate it is, but it showed that my cortisol was on the lower side of the range, which is amazing because that's, again, it was like 6.5.
Okay. Did you have the sort of like 4-point test where you were having it different times?
No, that's a good point. I got it. It was like middle afternoon, but I hadn't eaten. I think I was fasting that whole day besides breakfast.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's one of those things that will like just really vary throughout the day. So you really want to have like a few markers for it in the morning. I've had some clients where like they're just literally not producing any, and they're just literally just stuck in bed because there's nothing to get them up. It's one of those things that you don't want it too high, it's sort of just right. I'm definitely a big believer in trying to keep your coffee after breakfast. I think that's a really just great thing. Whenever I don't do that, my whole day feels a bit more agitated. So I think that's like a really important thing. Although like some days I'm just like, right, well, I'm just having it first thing now. You can't be right all the time.
I wonder if coffee and caffeine could be used medicinally for someone with low cortisol. Do you think so? To raise it?
Um, I would probably. I'm not sure if I would go with that. If someone's really flatlining, I would probably be thinking more about like DHEA potentially, maybe like a small dose of that, like just sprinkled on the food. Just if someone's really had a stressful period, I think that like DHEA can be really useful because you're upstream and then you can just it can go where it needs to. I think using coffee is sort of like the fast and dirty route, really, of doing it. I'd probably rather use other things first.
Yeah, maybe progesterone too. I played around with the cream, and I haven't had too many strong. I think it has helped my sleep sometimes if I rub it on before bed.
Yeah, I think I've used progesterone. I'm using more of it uh, in practice now to clients with like estrogen dominant conditions like endometriosis and PCOS. I think it really has a lot of merit there. I think it has a lot of uses. But again, it can be quite scary to sort of use something like that. You think, oh, I'm like taking a hormone. Like, how does this work? So you have to sort of tread lightly. And obviously, it doesn't work for everyone. Like some people, it like can affect their blood sugar, it can make them feel more tired. Um, so yeah, but again, that's like another big one from like repeating things.
Mm-hmm. Kind of a random question, Matt. Have you, working with clients, seen anyone that had like a chronic infection, like where you had to dive in and find out whether it's Lyme or an autoimmune thing or something going on? Or
Yeah, like certainly, I mean, I've definitely had clients with things like I haven't had that much experience of Lyme, but certainly things like parasites. Like they can be an interesting one when people have like very low iron. I'm starting to, and like they're eating a lot of like they're eating like a fairly good diet. I start to think, okay, who's stealing the iron? You know, who's robbing it? And then you've obviously got the other ones like like candidiasis infections and things. I think there's probably a lot more going on than we think, and I think there's a lot that doesn't show up on tests as well. Certainly from a parasite perspective, like who knows where some of these things can be hiding. Um, it is interesting though with the whole parasite field because you could argue that parasites were kind of an integral part of how humans like regulated their immune systems, and that when we started taking them out, that's when things actually started to go wrong. Like there's been some really interesting studies. There's a really great book called The Epidemic of Absence. I can't remember the author's name, but it's a great book on his experience of parasites. And he mentions how parasites have had like may have a did have a protective function for even things like malaria, and they're actually helping sort of regulate that immune response. And there was this whole he basically discovered this whole cult of people who were using parasites, like literally trading them to help with like the allergies. And he basically had like terrible allergies and hay fever, and he basically self-infected himself with a parasite, and his allergies just went away like overnight. He just walked out and he had none of them. Now, anybody listening to this, I would not suggest that you go and infect yourself with a parasite if you have hay fever, but it's just so interesting how it's almost like they're just modulating that immune response. And then when you take them out, it's like the immune system suddenly doesn't have anything to do. And it's like trying to grab at things. And I think that has probably, I think, again, it just sort of plays into that whole picture of how sterile we are now. And how that is probably causing, or at least playing into the whole autoimmune side of things.
mm-hmm.
Because I think sometimes when we talk about parasites, we can sort of like blanket, like demonize them. But when you start to read about how they've been regulating the immune system, you kind of think, oh, like maybe they did have like a role. But a lot of the time, again, like I said, they can be causing a lot of problems in the background, and they can often be overlooked, especially in like modern medicine.
Did you see the video of Dave Asprey when it was like 2016, he swallowed rat tapeworm larvae?
I have not seen that. No. What happened to them?
He swallowed on camera like 40 tapeworm larvae, and it's pretty gross.
Why would he do that?
I guess it's supposed to reduce, like you said, like autoimmune symptoms.
Oh, he was doing it for that. Yeah. What happened to it?
And he's still, he doesn't look as good as he used to. So I don't know if it did him good.
Was it David Osprey?
Yeah, the bulletproof.
Yeah, the keto man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is he still doing keto? Because I feel like the keto trend's dead now, and all the people who are like advocates of keto are now basically eating like what's his name? Carnivore MD is basically become the new advocate of like the metabolic diet.
Right. Yeah, I think Thomas DeLauer, like all the big guys.
Yeah. It was inevitable. I always thought it was inevitable because you can't expect, running on your backup system to be like, how can that be sustainable? Like, if we were meant to be in that state, we would just run on that.
Right.
This is just inherent fact of life. You can't deny that. I mean, yeah, like sure, like some people feel better on a higher fat, but the idea that you should force your body to burn fatty acids is just inherently you're simply inducing a high scarcity environment into the body. That's what you're doing, just replicating scarcity.
Right. Yeah, and I've been thinking about recently, I think men especially, but women too, get addicted to that like trim look of like really, really low body fat percentage. And I did it and I definitely got cut and lean, but I didn't feel the best.
Yeah.
Like eating less calories and intermittent fasting and restricting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like the whole logic is, if I'm burning fat, then I'm going to burn my fat, right? But it's like you don't have to go to those extremes to find a nice healthy body weight. I honestly believe that if you are really eating like a good balanced diet, that your body will just naturally find like a nice weight for itself. I don't think you have to like push your body into like this survival mode because it's like to break down a fat and like make it into energy requires a lot of energy and like a lot of work for the body. It's not available straight away. So yeah, and like don't get me wrong, like I think like some people do get on better in having slightly more fat, and I definitely find that during the winter time I have like more of a craving for it. Like in the summertime I just want more like fruits and things. I don't really want to have like lots of fatty foods. It's not appealing to me. I do think that there probably was this natural drift into a higher fat diet in the winter. It just makes sense that that's when you should eat more.
Yeah, I agree. I'll be experimenting now that I'll have, fruit production and vegetables year round in my dome, growing dome.
Yeah. So when's that going to be built? Is that going to be built soon or?
Yeah, about 2 weeks finally. And I have citrus trees ready to go in there. I have goji berry and different things.
Wow. How big is it?
Yeah, 33-foot diameter. It's like their biggest. So it's a company out of Colorado, and 33-foot is their biggest model. And if you go on YouTube and search growing spaces domes, you see some cool setups. I mean, people get really, aesthetic with it. And you have like I'm going to have a little koi pond in there, and you could put a waterfall in if you want. And
Nice.
Basically raised beds all along the circle on the perimeter.
Wow. Yeah, that's going to be amazing. I think it'd be so like great to sort of just grow your own food. I think I think it will become more and more of like a thing now because everything's going up. Like in the UK, it's just crazy how expensive everything is. Like a food shop is costing like double now. So I have no doubt this will push people to just start growing their own food, and that will be a good thing. Like people should just grow more of their own food and become a bit more, just a bit more like reliable on their own selves.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do worry about where the world's going, like sometimes, and like I do think that this is something that we should probably all have the skill to do a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. And be able to protect it too. I mean, I look at what's happening in Canada, turning into like communist China. It's like, take away the guns and now you can't defend your garden. And it's like, so those two kind of go hand in hand. Need some way to fend it off if someone's trying to go and burn it to the ground or something.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to be careful that we don't watch too much of like The Walking Dead because they often, a lot of these programs often portray like humans' worst fear, which is humans turning on each other, right? That these sort of things will bring out the worst in us. But there's a part of me that would at least like to think that like maybe we would actually come together more in community, and actually maybe we could find ways of like connecting with each other more, and like our neighbors and things. And like maybe in my little town here, we would actually come together. Like, I mean, we don't have the guns here like you guys do, so it's quite different here. Like,
so what about like the robots, Matt, like the artificial intelligence? That's a wild card, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a whole I mean, that's something that we're all going to get to see, which is going to be nuts, because like Elon Musk is just kind of using his technology that he's using in his cars, and he's just going to put that into like a human. I think in terms of using it for like general care things, I think that those sort of things will be interesting to see. But like, I think like we're getting quite close to having. I mean, there was that guy that was fired from Google because he believed that Google's AI was like sentient. Did you read about that?
I didn't. Wow.
So I can't remember the name of Google's AI, but I thought he was like, you know, like a bit nuts when I first started reading about it. But I heard it, like, I listened to an interview with him, and he was like very sane. He was like, I believed that I was conversing with something that actually had some level of consciousness. And it was really interesting hearing this perspective. I mean, who knows like how far it's come, but he genuinely believed that this like AI had like feelings, and it was able to, you know, have some level of consciousness. So that was really interesting.
Have you seen the clips of like Tony Robbins or someone, you know, having a conversation with Sophia or one of these AI robots, and some people just make the argument, oh, it's all pre-programmed conversation, but that's, how do you know that, right? It's just something.
Yeah, thing is, it's so difficult to define what actually is consciousness, like, and actually pinpoint it and have like some threshold that is like you cross and then suddenly it's that. And I think if you ask the question of like what is consciousness to each person, they would give you a very like different response. And so it's so hard to say, like, when does the point of, you could have something that was hyper intelligent and that could answer everything, but whether you can identify whether that thing has some sort of, I think until we've identified it in ourselves, then we kind of won't be able to really know.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah, I think the future is going to be really wild. And I'm just like, well, probably having a family, having a farm, you know, having some level of security, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah, definitely. I think at the moment it's kind of a weird time, because often, like, this is the first time in my life where I started reading. I feel like all of the news and just general like podcasts are talking about how bad things are getting, and you know, like China's economy is going to collapse, and that's going to cause this and stuff. And it's the first time where I feel like something's building to some form of like a crescendo almost. It's not a particularly pleasant feeling to sort of feel. And sometimes I wonder, you know, what will be the point where, say, prices go up so much that there's like civil unrest or something, you know, that's like everyone's worst nightmare. But I try and remain optimistic with all this going on, you know, and I just need to focus on, you know, like working with my clients and doing my supplements and things, and it's not all going to be like a shambles in a few years.
Yeah, you made a good point about the programming. Like, you know, we have Netflix over here. I don't watch it, but all these shows and movies, and obviously Hollywood program people, and yeah, a lot of it's just apocalyptic programming. And
yeah, it's like it's all just a reflection of the time. Like, people love the apocalyptic stuff right now. It's like I mean, how many series did like that Undead program run for? It just ran for like 10 series, just over and over again, like more apocalypse, more like sort of bandits running around and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think a real life zombie thing, like running zombies, that would be the most entertaining apocalypse to me.
You guys can use your guns over there.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So back to back to
Back to
our
nutrition.
it's,
Back to nutrition. Back to shilajit and magnesium.
well, I was curious, Matt, why you I know B6 helps with magnesium utilization, but I thought it was fascinating that you put that in your
Yeah,
magnesium license.
I only put like a small dose of it. Like B6 is obviously like a cofactor for like, over 100 different metabolic reactions in your cells, for all sorts of neurotransmitters. Obviously, like you shouldn't be taking, I'm not a fan of the large doses, and also the cheap forms of it can also inhibit your own endogenous supply of it. So it's really important that if you are using it, then you use the PLP form. So I just think it's like I only put 1 milligram in there because I just think it's just a nice little buffer. I don't think you need loads of it. Because obviously if you have too much of it, then you're obviously going to get the like risks associated with that, nerve toxins and all this.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear about that. Like there's some Facebook groups are wild because each group has their poison. Like, never take this, you're going to die, but I think it's always the context and the amount. And I've been reading a lot of,
like you say, it's all about the form and dosage.
Mm-hmm. I think it's like 2,000 plus milligram, or you have to take quite a bit to get that neuropathy effect.
Yeah, you have to take a lot. I know some people think they experience like more or less. It just comes down to the individual. Like if I'm working with someone, I think that they perhaps could benefit with a little bit of B6, then I'm going to use it, and just start like low with it. It's really like all the B vitamins have their own like really unique kind of like function in the body, and I often like to use some of them in isolation. Like thiamine's another really interesting one, which is just great for just helping people like metabolize nutrients. It's like one of the kind of fire starters for making sure you're metabolizing your carbohydrates and things. And there's always new forms coming out of different things, because we found a way to like take off a hydrogen molecule and then stick on like a sulfur molecule. Like there's a new form of thiamine called thiamine tetrasulfide something, and there's some really interesting research in that. So I definitely find that like I use them in isolation quite often. I mean, like only for the right scenarios. I think it's great if you can get like a whole food source. Like obviously liver is a great source of having all of your B vitamins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Okay.
I was going to say, like, are you still doing like a lot of liver these days yourself?
Yeah, since my recent test last week, where it seemed like I was pretty low, both saturation and serum, I just kind of doubled or tripled my liver consumption.
I think you mentioned you kind of wanted a bit more methionine as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And liver always makes me feel awesome. And I kind of pulsed it over the last several years, where I'd take a few weeks or a month off and then get back on it. But that's something I feel better eating every day than once a week. Like, especially if I'm just taking the freeze-dried capsules, I definitely feel the benefit taking it daily.
Yeah, clients often ask me, like, is this something I have to have daily? And I'm like, well, no, like you can just like, you can have 2 servings of it a week if they're larger, and like see if that works for you. Because I know in the RCP, like it's kind of spread out. As in like everything's kind of reduced to how much you take daily, but I don't think you necessarily have to take it all the time. I think you can have a couple of servings a week if easier. I think liver's one of those ones that people really do struggle. Like a lot of my clients really struggle with. Mm-hmm. If you've never like had something like beef liver, it probably won't be appealing to you. So you've just got like most of my clients take the capsules.
Yeah, I think they work just as fine, and there's so many nutrients in there. And I've been thinking about lately, like whether it's long COVID or a chronic infection or parasites, our nutrient needs could go through the roof. Like I found a study with vitamin K2 in COVID, where COVID actually reduces our K2 level.
Yeah, I remember actually reading early on that there was, I can't remember where it was. It was an article published in The Guardian a while ago that there was an area of Japan that had like a high intake of K2 and they had like less severe disease. It was like correlation between intake and severity of COVID. And then maybe that's due to this sort of like clotting factor, right? It's like helping the blood be a bit more sensible, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Let me see some of our questions here, Matt. We got steps to heal leaky gut.
Steps to heal leaky gut. Oh, that's like a big one. I think it really depends. Like, I think a lot of time, I think it can be really helpful to simplify your diet a bit more. So just eating like a few different things, not having too much stuff on your plate, and focusing on, like, I think gelatin is just one of the go-tos for me when I work with someone with leaky gut. Like, I think because you can eat a lot of it and there's no problem with that, right? So just having like really easy digestible food. And just like going from there really, and not having anything that's going to be too hard. And I think people are often afraid to like simplify their diet down, because often we're taught to have as much variety as possible. So eat as much variety, but if someone's got gut issues, sometimes it can just be nice just to have like a few foods on your plate regularly for a few days. You don't have to like worry about how much variety you're getting. Just like simplify things down and just have really easily digestible things for a while, and just see if that helps.
Yeah, that's awesome. Makes sense. Do you ever use probiotics with clients?
Yeah, definitely. I like some of the spore-based ones, like Akkermansia species. I know you've got a spore-based. I actually recommended a client your spore-based probiotic the other day. Actually, I really like the spore-based ones. They can also be good for like out competing other things. So if someone's got like, maybe like they've got like candida or something, you can outcompete those species with probiotics. So I don't know about taking probiotics all the time. I think they're nice for like a short spell. Obviously, their effects are kind of transient, right? It's like as they pass through you, they're having this effect. So I don't think you can like massively change your microbiome with them. And I think it's really important that you pick the right species. Like I don't feel like the whole lactobacillus ones are that interesting, particularly. I know they're the ones that are like shoved in supplements and things, but I definitely think like the spore-based ones and Akkermansia things are more interesting.
Yeah. Recently, I've been looking into the yeast one, Saccharomyces boulardii. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can use that to outcompete other yeast species as well.
That one seems. I've heard that's really good for acne too. Interesting.
Yeah, I use Saccharomyces boulardii sometimes. Yeah, it's an okay one. Like, it's definitely like one of the better ones, I think, compared to, again, like the kind of standard lactobacillus ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The probiotic therapy is fascinating. I've been experimenting recently and kind of megadosing like 450 billion to 900 or is it million? Yeah, I think 900 million.
Yeah, it's like crazy numbers. Crazy
Right.
numbers of species.
Definitely felt some bloating, but then it passed and I felt better. So it's
What were you taking again?
It was a mixture of I think 8 strains, but it was kind of a prescription one that was made for the treatment of SIBO or different overgrowth.
Yeah, there's so many blends now, and the thing is, the whole field of probiotics is still quite new. Like, we don't really know exactly how all these things interact. Like, we've mapped the human genome, but we haven't really quite understood like the bacterial genome. So it's still quite like an emerging field, and I think that's really important to remember. Like, that with all these like probiotics that are like arriving on the market, it's still quite new. I'd much rather just be quite targeted about it. Like, probiotics are not like the first thing I tend to like jump to, really. I think they can often be quite alluring, like the idea that like I can just take this probiotic and my gut problems will be solved. And I have no doubt they can have a really powerful impact, but you need to be getting like the right things in place first in terms of your diet, and then I will use probiotics after if I feel they're necessary.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts on German new medicine? You've looked into that.
German new medicine? I'm not sure what that is. What is German?
It's kind of trending right now, and I looked into it just a little bit, and apparently I think it's like an emotional way to deal with disease. Let me see.
No, I don't know that.
I haven't heard of that one. It's really trending right now. There we go. Pseudoscience came up on Google.
Well, everything's
So,
pseudoscience.
Yeah, I guess we could skip that one, but
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
yeah, I want to say it's like an emotional way to like working with trauma to move through disease. Pretty sure.
What is it? Is it like a form of therapy?
Yeah, yeah. I haven't been able to find like a concise definition of what it is, though.
I would just use trusty IFS. It's great, and also with IFS you get to understand your own internal world. You're not relying on someone else to necessarily solve it. You just get to know the parts of you that that you're struggling with.
Is the IFS-institute a good website you'd recommend, or?
Yeah, like I think the practitioners are on there. They have like different areas, different places. I think it's just like a real paradigm shift for therapy, and like again, I just think it's so great to have alongside like nutrition work, because I think people really get to know like the parts of themselves that perhaps they haven't really wanted to. Because often if you ask someone, how do you feel towards like your anxious part, they'll probably say, I don't like it, I hate it. And then often, traditional therapy is like, how can you deal with that and like push it away? But the great thing about IFS is that there's no bad parts. So it's like once you start to see like all the positive intentions for all of these parts of yourselves, it's less overwhelming for people. And I definitely notice sometimes with clients, when I try and get them to think about what is the positive intention of those parts, I definitely find that there's just like a little bit of relaxation, because they're not blended with the part anymore. They're not talking from, no longer they have to say I'm anxious or I'm angry. They can say a part of me. So you've already got a slight disconnect there. You have the self and you've got the part. So that can just be a relief for people, just to know that there's like a self part.
It makes me think, like, I think a decade ago, I heard this concept of when someone's diagnosed with a disease, instead of saying I have, cancer, whatever, say my body has. Is that kind of the same idea a little bit?
Yeah. I think it's just like it's not, the thing is, if you say I am angry or I am anxious, then you're just like, you're labeling yourself as that, as like inherently that, but no one's that. These are all normal feelings. I know the world of like psychiatrics wants to like make us all take medicines for all of our feelings and things, but honest to God, like I think a lot of the time these are just normal feelings that are actually trying to look after us. Like if you feel scared, anxious, angry, like they're all just there trying to serve you in some positive way. It's just the way they go about doing it sometimes isn't very comfortable, like I said, because the part's frozen at the time of the incident. So yeah, I just think it's nice to have that sort of break between things, not so you don't get so blended with things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds super, super helpful. Let me see. High blood pressure advice.
Well, I'd have to know the whole case, but I think with high blood pressure, like, first of all, you need to work on like what's happening with your stress levels. Like number one, that should be, before you start taking any supplements, just try and identify like what are your triggers of stress, because high blood pressure is a high stress situation, right? And then I think after that, like I'd be thinking more about like things like magnesium salt baths would come to mind, like something like really gentle and something that's going to be like more of a full body experience that's going to be relaxing as well. I would start with things like that personally.
Yeah, it makes sense. This is one of the last ones. Histamine, probably another individual thing. But...
Yeah, I actually did a podcast on histamine a while ago with a friend of mine, Grace, and histamine is such a big topic. Like we could spend a whole time just talking about the history of histamine and schizophrenia and all sorts of interesting things. I think with histamine, like I think again, like copper is going to be a big player there. Like you want to get your DAO firing. And I always say with histamine, often people will say I'm histamine intolerant, right? It's not that you're intolerant. It's just how much can you tolerate? It's like, what is your bucket? And the enzyme is the holes in the bottom that's letting it out. So it's really important with histamine. You start to think about it in terms of if you didn't have histamine, you just wouldn't, it's such an integral part of your immune system. It's essential. And whenever it's like the one that starts the party in the body when there's inflammation, and it's there to open the floodgates so all the other immune cells can get in, right? So we need histamine for like loads of different things. But again, there's lots of different things that have natural antihistamine properties, whether that's like vitamin C, nettle, quercetin, copper. Like these are all things that I would be thinking about with someone with high histamine issues, because I'd want to make sure that we're inhibiting that release of histamine from the mast cells, and also we're just making sure that that DAO enzyme is working like really well. But I see a lot of clients with histamine issues now. It's like pretty standard that people have histamine issues. And as I mentioned, like I've even had it where just donating blood can be nice for histamine. It's like a weird one that that isn't something I would jump to straight away. And then other more like niche things would be like supplementing kidney or something. That would be, I find that to be useful. So I'd recommend that for clients over something like beef liver in those situations.
Mm. Have you ever seen like low zinc in someone with histamine issues?
Yes, I have. I mean, I've seen low zinc, like definitely in those situations. I've also seen really high zinc. The serum zinc and copper are like a really funny one, because I've seen them really high in all sorts of strange situations, right? And I always ask the question, like, why is the body pushing that mineral into the blood, right? And I wrote this post a while ago saying like the question is the most important thing with blood work. It's like, what's the story behind this? Why is the body pushing that in? And it's like, well, maybe it needs to make more superoxide dismutase. Like maybe it's actually like pushing it into the serum because it needs it there for a reason. And I think you have to move away from this idea of like, I'm like zinc toxic or like copper toxic just because it's high in my serum. It's like, okay, well, let's find out what's actually driving it into the serum in those levels. Let's actually figure out. And loads of conditions will do this, like loads of autoimmune, like I see loads of clients who have autoimmune like issues. They have high copper, high ceruloplasmin. Does that mean that I'm not going to introduce copper rich foods to them? No. And I've had it plenty of times where they've had high copper and high ceruloplasmin. We've introduced the copper and then they've actually come down those numbers. So it's like, in this sense, we would just say that those things are now in the right place. They're not having to be forced out of the cell, say.
Interesting. Wow. Have you ever experimented with like isolated copper supplements like bisglycinate or anything like that?
Yeah, I've tried like copper bisglycinate, and I've recommended drops sometimes, like copper sulfate drops occasionally. It's not something that I jumped to at the start. I know obviously in Jason Hummel's group, they're really big on having like the copper sulfate, and so that's really interesting. It's not something, again, I jumped to straight away. I mean, is it something that you've tried a lot recently? Actually, didn't you try quite a lot of it with the drops?
Yeah, I feel the bisglycinate the most. That's why I put that in my beef liver supplement.
I saw you've got a new supplement with that. That sounds like a great combination. I would say that the glycinate form is probably the most gentle. It's just that sometimes, like obviously when you take these things, especially copper and zinc, like people feel nauseous.
Yeah. The first time I put the sulfate in my coffee, it tasted horrible and I felt nauseous. And so
you go. Yeah, I had a client the other day who just like took, I think, like 3 milligrams and just like instantly threw up. Just instantly was sick because it just made, and I was like, you've got to take things really slow with these things, especially like for some reason, copper and zinc are particularly sensitive when they're given in isolation. You have to be quite delicate with the right balance.
Right. Yeah. And I usually recommend people take any supplement with food because it's generally going to be better. But
the only ones I think are nice is like, the adrenal supports and like the vitamin C, like you just take them away. It's just easier. And I think it's just more, I think with like electrolytes generally, it's just nice to have them. If you're taking like a water form, say, then just having that. So it's really, you're getting access to it straight away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I've heard zinc as well. You want to take that on its own if you're taking like zinc bisglycinate or something.
Yeah. Yeah, generally like zinc is more, I usually recommend like if someone's going to have that like after dinner. Um Generally speaking, I think zinc tends to be a bit more sedative than copper. I think that's the general rule of thumb with these things. I mean, like personally for me, if I take zinc in the evening, like it doesn't help me at all. It actually brings my sleep, it makes it much worse. So again, it's one of those things where it's just very unique from person to person.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I love how just wide perspective you have, and just realizing the context of each individual case. Because I think it's easy to just paint a broad brush to everybody. And
Yeah, I mean, I wish it was as simple as just giving everyone like one thing. I wish it was that easy. It would save me so much time, like writing everything up. But it's like everyone has like a different starting point. Some people that are they're at such like a down point in their life, right? They're completely exhausted, they're completely wrecked, and it's like you've got to just start so slow with with these people, like a little bit of salt on their food potentially, and like just starting with something like really simple like that, and some like drops in their water. I can't just give them, beef liver from day one or something like that. It would just be too much. So yeah, I seem to get like a real like variety of people. Like some people that are, I always like it when someone contacts me to when they don't have any symptoms and they're just reaching out because they want to take a more proactive state in their health. And like, this is just such a great thing. I always just like say to people that are doing that, I'm like, well done for just taking ownership and being proactive, because once the body's fallen off that kind of cliff and the autoimmunity started, it can be a long way back. It's a long road. It's like you've suddenly and there's always something, there's a straw that breaks the camel's back, right? Something that every time, all my clients, it's just some traumatic incident, and then bam, that the autoimmunity started. And then to find your way back from autoimmunity can be like a long journey, because again, like your body's developed antibodies and your immune system's activated. So I really wish more people would, like, while they're well, like think about what it feels like to be well and try and think about ways that you can keep that going, because this needs to be the future of medicine now, where people are visiting health practitioners when they are well.
That's awesome. Yeah, usually people wait till it's almost too late.
Yeah, like people, I mean, this is the allopathic model. It's like we go to the doctor when like you're sick, and then you're on symptom management for the rest of your life. It's like, it's not, but I do think that the whole reactive medicine model, I think, is just like eventually going to collapse. There's no way that you can have a model of medicine built on like reactivity. It's just like that whole model just cannot be sustained long term. Yeah, so I think like more and more, and this is where like the whole like functional medicine sides come in and everything. I do find it interesting, that word functional. It's like, what was it before? Was it non-functional? It's like this is what we are practicing now. We're practicing real things.
Right. I love it. Well, this was awesome, Matt. So you provide consultations, and people could check that out at
people can go to my website and like drop me an email. I'll probably have some more spaces like maybe at the tail end of this month, but it like really varies. Like sometimes I get like a big influx, and I don't keep like a huge practice because I'm also juggling running my own supplement company here in the UK, and that's taking up a lot of time as well, like admin and like designing things, as you know as well, right? It can take up a lot of time. So yeah, I don't keep my practice too big.
Well, I think it's awesome what you're doing, and appreciate you coming on and sharing your philosophy, and cool to learn about IFS. I'd never heard about that therapy. So
yeah, it's been great chatting. It's been great.
Awesome. Right on, Matt. We'll stick around as we close out the show. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
That wraps up today's show. If you want to work with Matt, you can head over to mattjarosy.com, and that's JAROSY.com. you want to work with him one-on-one. He also has his recommended products up there and a link to his supplement brand where you can check out his magnesium, shilajit, whole food vitamin C, iodine, a lot of cool supplements that he's providing. And also his blog posts are great if you want to read about vitamin K, water filters. He has articles on sugar and ketogenic diet, cancer, saturated and unsaturated fat, leaky gut. A lot of great information that Matt's putting out. And I think it's very helpful to work with somebody one-on-one if you feel overwhelmed and don't know where to start. And I'll also put the link below where you can check out his supplement brand. And I'm not going to say the name because I'll probably butcher it again. And if you want to support the show and my work, you can head over to matt-blackburn.com. Right now, I'm rewriting the CLF protocol based on a lot of new information that I've come across this year just to make it more integrative and more balanced approach, less fear-based. I'm going to be restructuring my calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis protocol. And it's taking me longer than I expected to write that up. So stay tuned to that. I'll announce that when that's back up on the website. But you can head over to shop and see my recommended products. I just put the masa chips up there. These tortilla chips are made in the traditional way using nixtamalization and cooked in grass-fed beef tallow. And they're delicious, especially with guacamole, especially if it's homemade. Huge fan of those. Highly recommend them. And you can see those on the site as masa chips. I also recently added self-decode to the website. I recently interviewed Joe Cohen, and he created the DNA decoding software that uses polygenic risk scoring, basically analyzing your genome and making it really easy to understand whether you have increased needs for vitamin A like myself or decreased needs for nutrient or more prone to different things. It's just one more piece of information that we can use to optimize our health. So it's $3.99, and that gets you the premium membership, and you save a little bit if you use the discount code Blackburn. Big fan of this platform. And again, it's not the end-all be-all to understanding your health, but alongside HTMAs, blood work, urine, stool tests, the more information, the better, I think, to be able to take control of our health and reverse chronic things that we've been dealing with for years. My supplement brand is called Mitolife. You can find that at mitolife.co. And the latest product is the New Zealand sourced beef liver. This is freeze-dried beef liver, but what makes it interesting is we spiked it with a few milligrams of copper bisglycinate. And I'm a big fan of that bisglycinate form, whether it be magnesium or zinc bisglycinate. I do really well with that form, and I think we could all use more glycine. And I've tried multiple different forms of copper, and this is the one that I feel the most. Definitely feel a nootropic effect, a little energy boost, and it works together so well with all the other nutrients in there. You could think of beef liver as a, quote, whole food B complex supplement. Pretty much has all the B vitamins in there, and those are critical for stress resilience, energy production, detoxification, so many things. So I'm going to keep this recording short because it's my birthday as I'm recording today, but I have really exciting guests lined up for the next several weeks. I'm going to do a solo show talking about my thoughts on iron deficiency, why I think it's such a big deal and that it's real and actually exists. So stay tuned for that information. See you guys next Friday. Stay supercharged.